Hello everyone, Dan Borrero, USA Land Ventures, as promised, bringing to you live our first interview with Joe MEARES. Joe MEARES is a 32-year-old real estate investor. He has 36 doors under his belt. Not only is Joe MEARES a real estate investor, but Joe MEARES is my nephew. I've known this man since he was born. We've been vacationing here at Cape Cod every year, both families, right? Mm-hmm. Wonderful experiences, developing wonderful memories. And what I'm most proud of is watching Joseph not only grow into the man that he's grown into, but the investor, real estate investor that he is not only grown into, but continues to grow in leaps and bounds. As I said, 36 doors in less than 2 years. Joe, tell him something about yourself before we even start this interview.
Yeah, sure. So like Uncle Danny said, I'm 32. I went to the University of Notre Dame, studied finance. Started my work on Wall Street in investment banking, and so I've been on Wall Street now for about 10 years. And you know, when I hit 30 2 years ago, kind of asked myself, my 20s are over, what do I have to show for it? And honestly, like I had done pretty well so far. I have a good job, and I had saved up a good amount of money thanks to good advice from my uncle and my dad. Always put away a third of my paycheck, so I had a little nest egg set up, but kind of decided, I thought to myself, do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? And the answer I came up with was no. And so I started reading more about self-development, about personal wealth building, and all the roads kept pointing towards real estate. So I started talking more about real estate with my uncle, and decided to take the plunge back in 2018.
So one of the things I really want to point out to you guys, I can't stress enough, is something he just said that he learned from a young age, right? Primarily from his dad and his mom. He saved 30% of his salary. That put him so much further ahead when he was prepared to start to invest, because he essentially went with 30% of his salary less on an annual basis. He went without. He didn't know, right? You didn't know exactly what you were going to invest in, right? Or how you were going to invest.
Just squirreling it away, yeah.
Right,
exactly.
You were putting it away for waiting for the opportunity, right? Or for you to decide on what you wanted to do. So again, and this is one of the things that I'm constantly preaching, is relationships, living below your means, and moving forward with education. So Joe, tell me, and these are my notes because I wanted to ask Joseph and I didn't want to forget. So the deciding factor was when you turned 30, correct?
Yeah, it was kind of just a wake-up call. It's like a big number, and it makes you get reflective, and so I did some thinking. What
did you do from 30 to prepare for your career in real estate investing?
Yeah, definitely, great question. So one of the biggest things is you got to have a mentor, right? So I had great mentors in my dad and my uncle, but also I got really lucky that I met a guy that I worked with who, a couple of the other guys that I'm co-workers with had been investing in real estate, and he was nice enough to do a phone call with us. Actually, it was 2018. I took the phone call from the parking lot of this very resort. I remember it to this day, and he kind of explained how he invests, and when he was explaining himself on the call, kind of tied in with what Uncle Danny had said, and I realized, this really fits my skill set, and I think this is something that I can do. So once that happened, I started to really annoy the hell out of my uncle and out of my friend. Kept texting them like, what should I do next? What should I do next?
By no means was it annoying.
And asking them what book should I read. You can really get a mini real estate MBA for less than $100 really, for finding the right books online. So I read the books that they both suggested, read some of them multiple times, and so that was August of 2018, and I ended up buying my first property in October of 2018. So it was pretty quick, but one thing one of my mentors says is, you don't have to be great to start, but you got to start to be great. So,
well, I would say for anybody new, I would say biggerpockets.com is a great spot, a great place to start getting information on. What would you say, Joseph?
Well, I would say USA Land Ventures.
Oh, thank you.
But no, there's a really great book called Long Distance Real Estate Investing by Robert Greene. That was one of the very first that I read, and have read probably 3 times since I first read it. And then after that, The Millionaire Real Estate Investor is also a great book because it teaches you from start to finish how to create a funnel and really how to set goals for yourself and how to create a network for yourself.
So I'll give you two books that actually I would highly recommend. One of them is The Millionaire Mind and The Millionaire Next Door, because that is essentially teaching you how real self-made millionaires have made their millions, and they all started with how to save and how to go without. And the other one would be The Wolf of Wall Street. He's Jordan Belfort.
Mm-hmm.
He was incredible. It was whether you like him or you don't, he was able to put into his book all the steps that you should learn how to, in reference to how to sell. I don't care what business you're in, you need to always know how to sell. What I wish I knew that you can't trust contractors, and nothing bad about contractors, but there are a lot of bad ones out there, and you could really get screwed in the event that you go with the wrong contractor.
I would say the number one thing that I would tell myself if I went back 2 years is don't chase deals. You can't fall in love with a deal just because it may look good on paper. Don't overpay, because there's always going to be another deal. So take your time, be patient. Don't wait too long to start, but don't just go after something because it looks good and it's the first one you looked at. Try to take your time and definitely don't chase.
The other thing I would say to that would be not only don't chase the deal, but don't get discouraged. Especially in this market. This market is extremely difficult to get good deals in. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot less inventory. Even though COVID has essentially, supposedly turned over the economy, certain areas in the United States is still booming, still hot. Or you could find that niche, and like Joseph and I have found, right? Joseph has decided to, although he lives here in New York, tell him where you invest at.
So I invest in a small town in Indiana. It's like an hour outside of Indianapolis, and yeah, it's a place where I have a friend who I went to college with. It's his hometown. I had a slight knowledge of it. A slight knowledge of it coming out of college. I'd been there maybe once or twice, but when I read the books and the ones that I was reading about, they talked about smaller towns, and this one just kept popping up in my head. So when I looked at the town and ran the numbers, it all made sense. So yeah, making your.
So my niche is primarily New York City, southern New Jersey, northern New Jersey, as well as Central Florida. Anything in Central Florida, I mean, I'll flip anything in Central Florida, but I hold on to anything good in reference to the condos. They're much easier to manage from a distance, although you're paying those HOA fees. Essentially, you just concern yourself with the inside of the unit once they're renovated, and it's a lot easier to manage from a distance. The most important thing to me, which Joe is finally is realized at a young age, is cash flow, especially cash on cash return. Joe, why don't you explain that to them?
Yeah, so your cash on cash return, it's a really simple return metric. It's just the amount of money that you make on a monthly basis after all of your expenses and the mortgage divided by the amount of money that you invest. So say you bought a house for $20,000 cash, just using round numbers, and you make $5,000 every year in cash flow. That would be a 25% cash on cash return. So that's a very important metric that I look at when I'm looking at a house if I'm thinking about buying it.
Besides the fact that you were saving 30% of your salary,
Mm-hmm.
And then afterwards you obviously educated yourself, correct?
Right.
What was the most difficult part as far as buying that first property for you?
For me, it was because I bought the first property sight unseen, which means that the only pictures I saw were really on Zillow. I had my real estate agent go through it, and we did a FaceTime looking at the house. So I had never walked through the house before I bought it. That was probably the hardest part to wrap my head around. And then also, most people think that it's scary to invest far away from you, but what I've found is that it's very similar to if you bought something into your in your actual town, because the reality is you're not going to go there every week and look at the house if you own it, even if it's in your town, right? So I think those were the two biggest things. We're buying a place sight unseen, and just getting comfortable with the fact that I was making an investment in a town that's like 1,000 miles from where I live out in Indiana.
So the other thing I wanted to bring to to their attention was building relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you and I had just had this discussion today on the beach, where what you do differently from other investors in your same town. Please tell my audience in reference to what is it that how you develop those relationships?
Yeah.
And then how's that affected your business in a positive
Absolutely.
manner?
No.
So the team aspect of real estate and the networking aspect is incredibly important. So one of the first things I did after I decided to invest in August was I interviewed every single person on my team, from property managers to real estate agents, all the way down to exterminators. So I literally made a list of all the property managers in town. I had phone calls with all of them. I had a list of 20 questions that I asked all of them. And then before I chose one, I flew out to the town and I had an in-person interview with the last one that I thought was really going to be my guy. So after we had the in-person meeting, I realized we were a good match, and I went with them. And so all I can say is that what Uncle Danny was talking about in terms of what I do that other investors in my town do not do. So my property manager has other investors that live on the West Coast. The big difference is that I go out there once every 2 months, and I have my feet on the ground. I'm driving around. You probably heard Uncle Danny talk about driving for dollars all the time. So I drive around the town. One of the biggest things I did, and here's a tip you guys can use, is one of the very early times I went out there, I printed out like 20 maps of the town, just simple, printed out Google Maps. And my idea was to go to the local business owners and say, look, I'm looking to buy a house in this town. And I had a highlighter and a pen, and I said, can you highlight the good areas and circle the bad areas with the pen? So I left the hotel that morning, and I went to Starbucks to get a coffee, and I figured, there's some people in the Starbucks, maybe I'll loosen up my conversation skills a little bit. And there was two gentlemen sitting at a table. So I said, all right, I'm just gonna go ask these guys. So I walked up to them, and they looked at me like I had two heads at first, but they're like, yeah, we'll help you out. And so I expected them to kind of just circle really quickly with the highlighters and the pens, but the guy took the pen and he was tracing by street with the pen. And I said, it seems like you really know the town well. And he said, yeah, I know that I'm the deputy sheriff here. I know where all the bad areas are. So I lucked out. So I had one map, and that map is like, it sits on my desk to this day, and I know, and I have that, and I always look at that. So that's a tip for you guys. Like, just get out there. If you're thinking about investing in a town, literally go the extra mile, and get out there and do some actual research about what the town is like. Don't just trust people on TV.
Most importantly, what I think Joe's missing, though, what we were speaking earlier, is how you're there every 2 months. You're reinforcing those relationships with your contractor, your property manager, even down to your exterminator, right?
Right.
And you're letting them know you're not a fly by night, and you're there for the long term, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I've done that, exactly what he's done, I never got lucky at Starbucks getting the deputy sheriff. However, I've actually gone down to the precinct or the police station, and you'd be surprised how welcoming they are if you should ask them these questions, and they're overwhelmingly willing to help you, right? So in my case, if I'm in Florida and I'm looking at buying a bulk of 20 units, for instance, in one particular complex, I'll go to the local precinct or police station and say, how many calls have you had here? And are they domestic calls? Are they car theft calls? Are they burglary calls? Exactly what they are. And they'll literally give you all that information like this. I mean, can you get it online? Sure you can. Is it as detailed as what I've found that I get when I go in person? Absolutely not. The other thing is going to community board meetings. And you and I have spoken about that. You go to community board meetings, sometimes they're really boring, and then you got to get over the fact of everyone speaking because they have all egos, right? They just want bolstering themselves. But you get to find out who's asking for variance, why they're asking for that variance, who's asking for a permit and why they're asking for those permits, what commercial properties are coming in, if they're building a 20 pump gas station, where they're building that. These are things that you always want to know. This is information that gives you good leads to where to invest next, right? Even if you were just buying land, for instance. One of the things that I had the biggest realtor in a specific town we were working in before 2008, where we were moving about 1,500 lots a month. She asked me, how is it that we could sell so much more land from New York in that particular county that's in Florida? And I just simply said to her, because I'm willing to do everything that you're not. Now, what those things were was so obvious, I don't even understand how she had the audacity to ask me what those things were. But again, it's about creating relationships. It's about who's willing to work harder. It's about, who's willing to think outside the box. Do you disagree or do you agree?
No, I think that's very true. I mean, I think one of the reasons, and we were talking about this earlier today, the last 8 properties that I've bought have all been off-market deals that were brought to me 100% because of the relationships that I built when I go out to the town. And what you were saying about going out there is really true. There's a ton of investors that invest in Indianapolis because it's easy. You just fly right into Indianapolis and you're there. But the margins in that market are not good. And so by driving an extra hour after I land, the margins are much, much better. So.
Well, just a typical deal from the point that you buy it to the point that you renovate it, and then you rent it, and if you refinance it, explain that to them.
Yeah, so as an example, there was one house that I looked at that it was listed for $45,000. I had great relationships with, I use a mother and a daughter broker team out there. They actually knew the selling agent, and because of that, they were able to tell her my story and she was able to, basically put my offer. I offered $30,000, which is a very low offer for a $45,000 deal. But because I had that relationship, the selling agent said, "Look, this guy can close. He has the money. He's going to be, he's very good with execution on the deal. You're going to have no problems with him." So they accepted the $30,000 offer. The house needed about $15,000 of work. It needed all new electric. It needed floors. It needed the painting in the walls. It needed a new garage door. It needed a new front door. So we got that done for $15,000. 6 months later, the house appraised for $75,000, and I did a BRRR, buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat.
That's
which
right.
I'm sure you guys have heard about. And I got a check for 75% of the new value of the home, less my old mortgage. And that house rents for $875 a month, and all of my expenses are roughly $500 to $600 a month.
So what's your actual return on investment on that per year?
Well, that one's infinite because I got all my initial investment out of it. But typically, I'm getting mid to high teens cash on cash returns out there.
So what I've done is I hate hard money. I hate getting hard money. It's very expensive. And I hate refinancing my properties simply because there's a cost factor to originate those loans, right? There's you have your appraisal fees, you have your application fees, your origination fees, your underwriter fees, and every other fee that you could think of, especially if you're doing it here in New York. There's the mortgage taxes are outrageous. So having said that, what I do is, one, I do my fix and flips that generate cash so that I could, after I pay my taxes on that cash that I generated, I become my own bank. I don't spend that money, so if, let's say I made $90,000, guess what? I don't take $90,000 and go buy a new car or increase my lifestyle. I take the $90,000 and I use that so that I become my own bank, right? And now I'm paying myself back the interest that I would normally be paying a hard money lender, or the origination fees and everything else that I would go through a conventional mortgage. Having said that, also, another great way is if you have your own personal home, and I've done this hundreds of times, where I will max out a home equity line on my personal home. And I'll max that out 3 or 4 times sometimes. When business was rocking and rolling, we were doing about 180 closings a year up until about 3 years ago. Now we're not doing that a number because the numbers just aren't there to make sense to do it. But what we did do is we were just using our home equity line, and the home equity line was at 2.5%. And before 2018, I was able to even deduct the interest from that home equity line from my personal tax returns. So what was my real cost? Maybe 1.5%. So yeah, there's a lot of creative ways. The other thing is literally, when you live your life honestly, and people see how you live your life, you'll be surprised how many people want to throw money at you. If you do things the right way and you never screw anyone, and you develop that reputation, people will want to give you money to invest. I don't take money and put them into the deal. I pay them a percent as if it was a loan because I don't want any partners. when I do that. I don't do that often, but sometimes I do. So family, friends. The other thing is borrowing money from your 401k. There's a guy, his name is Chris Birch. He's somebody I want to definitely interview. He's become somewhat of a pro at this. He knows exactly where to go for this. I think I'm going to ask Chris if he's willing to do a Zoom interview with me to educate how to borrow against your IRA or your 401k, because you could definitely make a lot more money than what you're making at the market, and then paying all those fees for that. So there's many different creative ways to get financing. Thank you, Kenny. That's a great question.
Yeah, and I've actually done what he said about the 401k. I took a loan out against my 401k. It's like a 5.5%, 6% rate, and because I'm making 15 to 20% returns, it's a great trade. And
the other thing is, that 5.5% is going back to you anyway. If I remember correctly, except for a couple of points for the administration cost, right?
Right. It's tax shield, yeah. The first thing is you want to work with whatever realtor is bringing you good deals. So you don't necessarily want to work with just one realtor. You probably want to have a dedicated person that's like your go-to guy or girl. Like I said, I have a mother-daughter team out there. I also have a broker at the property manager that I work with who helps me a lot. But it's like you want to think of it the same way. I'm like very big on buying things on Amazon, and I'm like a freak with the reviews. So I'm very serious about going online, finding all the reviews possible on Google, on Yelp about any of these people, and usually they'll have their own reviews on their realtor's website as well, their broker's website. And then you want to literally interview them. So you want to have a list of questions that are important to ask, and like I said, these are things that I can teach you, Uncle Danny can teach you, but things that are in the books that we're talking about that they'll explain what you should be asking. So you literally want to have phone interviews with the people that you're thinking about using, and then you want to meet them in person. And yeah, you want to have a trusted partner. So it's what Uncle Danny said. It's really about building strong relationships with people. You don't want to just have it be something where you had. To be honest, the first person I worked with, I didn't have a great experience with, and so I moved on. I ended up using someone else. So you got to kind of be flexible, and you have to be diligent with your research on your team as well as the properties that you're buying.
So I'll tell you what I do. If I text a realtor or email a realtor at 11 o'clock at night, and that realtor emails me back like this, I want to work with that realtor. If I give a task to a realtor and they get back to me like this, I want to work with that realtor. If a realtor tells me excuses after excuses, that realtor's gone. I don't need excuses. I need people that make things happen. I have a very low tolerance for excuses. I have a very low tolerance for incompetence. And you don't really need to have much experience in this business to be a successful realtor. It's been my experience. Mm-hmm. What you need to have is good communication skills, in addition to the ability to address people's concerns in a calm and effective way. Now, what I find the best realtors for my situation are realtors that are not only are realtors, but they're also investors, or they work strictly with investors. They have a better understanding of what you and I, what our needs are, right?
Definitely.
Versus a realtor that works strictly with end users, because it's not that they're bad realtors; they just don't have the experience or the understanding of what we're looking for. A lot of them will say, "Well, that number's too low," and I says, "No, it's low for an end user. It's not low for an investor." Mm-hmm. And if they don't have an understanding of that, it's not going to happen. And Joe explained that earlier with the mother-daughter situation where you bought that house for $30,000. So as a result of him using those two realtors, the mother-daughter, they didn't get him a great deal because they got him a great deal because of who Joseph is and the ability to close. But essentially, and I don't think you gave those realtors enough credit, they sold that offer.
Absolutely.
They sold that offer to that seller. They sold that seller the idea of an easy closing. They sold that offer to that seller that it's going to be like this, no problems, it's guaranteed, you're going to close.
Yep.
That's the realtor you want. You want a realtor that's going to sell the offer.
So for example, for a property manager, I want to know.
Okay.
I want to know how many years have they been managing properties. How many properties do they manage? How many vacancies do they currently have? What do they charge? What do they charge? Do they have any special deals for guys who have volume? Do they give you a better price if you get to a certain amount of properties? Things of that nature. And then you also want to know, do they have in-house contractors? How do they source their tenants? What's their tenant interview process? I know this is a lot of things very quickly, but it's a lot of questions. And like I said, I have a list that I came up with from multiple different books it's about 20 questions, and I've used it in multiple geographies, and it's really helped me out. And yeah, you just want to be.
I think one of the biggest questions I would ask a manager, a property manager, is how much are they going to charge me for every lease renewal, and are they willing to forego that charge considering the volume that I'm going to be giving them, right? Because that could add up to a substantial amount of money.
Absolutely.
On an annual basis, and reduces your rate of return. Which, again, are they willing to work at a discounted price if you're willing to give them the volume, essentially? Yes and no. It all depends on the cost of the money. It all depends on the property. We have done it, but when I do it, I never leverage more than 65%, and I try to even keep it lower than that if possible, and I'll tell you why. I've been through some serious recessions since 1989. When I graduated from college in 1981, it was a horrible time. And I saw a lot of people lose property, lose their own personal homes. And I've seen this a couple of times now during the course of my 31 years of investing. So I hedge my bets. I will borrow and leverage, but I will only leverage to a point where that if the market drops, and my rent rolls drop approximately 20 to 30%, worst case scenario, I still have enough cash flow to pay off my financial obligations. So yes, it is worth doing, but everything depends on the cost of the money, the time where we are in the market, and what the rents are in average.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't go any further than 75% leverage on any of my properties, and I do own several of them free and clear. I plan to pull out the equity later on, but right now I'm happy to take the cash flow without having to pay the mortgage.
I would tell you have to find your niche, right? So Joseph found his niche in a small town in Indiana. It's a blue-collar area. Even during this pandemic, you still haven't lost any rents because you and I have spoken about that, right? Yeah. You have to find your niche, and you have to be able to get out of your head that you don't have to see this property. You don't have to actually manage it. If you could get out of your head that you don't have to be hands-on, and you could get past the fear of leaving your comfort zone into other areas that are more affordable to start investing in, you'll be wonderfully surprised how profitable it is. And case in point, Joseph and I live in New York City, and yes, I invest in New York City. I live in New York City, and yes, I invest in Jersey, which is an hour and a half from my home in certain areas. But I have more property, more doors out of my reach in Central Florida that are actually more profitable because I found my niche, especially at a time that it was extremely much more affordable while the rents were increasing dramatically because of the population growth. Right. And Joseph will attest to that because although he lives in New York City, most of his properties are in Indiana, correct?
Yeah, I don't own anything in New York City.
So get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. Get out of your comfort zone, and also a lot of people, when I tell them where I invest, they say, why would you want to invest there? And I always say, because the numbers make sense. It doesn't have to be some awesome metropolitan area that everyone would want to go visit. It just has to be, do the numbers make sense, and are these properties going to cash flow, and do you have a good team there? That's really the biggest things.
So I'll give you areas that I concentrate in. I concentrate in Central Florida. If you take your finger and put it literally on Disney World, and you draw a 45-mile radius of that, that's where I invest. I love everything on Corridor I-4, an area that's starting to boom right now that I think I'm a little surprised it took this long to start booming, is an area called Ocala. It's Marion County. It's right past Dillon. It's it's actually the Ocala National Forest is right next to it. It's close to the villages which is it's a senior citizen area. But I mean, the Villages, I think, has 2 or 3 of its own zip codes. That's how big it's grown over the last 20 years. But again, it all depends on the number. Do not get overzealous. Do not get depressed if they're not accepting your offers. Eventually, they'll take it. Sell the offer. Make sure the stronger your contract is. The way I'm doing now things to be able to get these properties that I'm buying for long term is to sell the offer is I'll go in with no inspection, right? It'll be contingent on nothing, or I'll do it all cash. And if I got to do a loan on it, it'll be a loan at 50%. So if you're coming in with a 50% down payment, and so they're gonna, even though my offer may be less, it's a guaranteed closing versus somebody else's offer. So these are the things that I've done to get my offers through. But yeah, Central Florida, I love it. There's another area called Altamont Springs, fantastic area. Lake Mary, another incredible area, really, really good.
Yeah, so I think it really depends on where you're investing and the type of tenant-landlord relationships and laws there are in that area. So in Indiana, the laws are very skewed towards the landlord, and also there's a very different tenant mindset there. The people that I rent to, well, first of all, my property manager has a very developed process by which he picks tenants. He's getting a lot of applications, and so he's able to pick very strong tenants. So that's something you want to ask your property manager. The other thing is that a lot of the people that I rent to, or most of the people that I rent to, they have a very strong sense of this is my home, because I do invest in single families. It's a little bit different from apartment investing, where the person feels like this is my house, I'm going to take care of it, and I want to stay here, and I want to continue to pay rent. So I actually have been getting some of my rents paid early versus missing payments. The other thing is, the area that you invest in, you want to make sure nowadays more than ever is more resistant, and maybe has more essential workers versus the past. So the area that I invest has a lot of education and a lot of healthcare. So healthcare is obviously doing very well right now. But yeah, it's very much on a geography to geography basis, because remember, you're buying a city, but also buying a neighborhood, and then you're buying on a specific block. So it's hard to look at the whole nation's economy and make a decision based on that.
So I agree with Joseph. I do a macro type of analysis, and then I bring it down to a micro. And what Joseph brought up is a really strong point, and we should have brought that up earlier. He and I both, when we go out of our comfort zone and buy outside of the state, he and I both look at the laws, the tenant-landlord laws. You want to buy in an area where landlords have more leverage than tenants do. 1. 2, I've actually been preparing. We've sold off a lot of properties that were not as profitable or were not as desirable from our inventory to generate a lot of cash, because the market had jumped so rapidly and so high, and the profit margins were there to take advantage of. Mm-hmm. And then what we've done in the interim is shore up our existing properties with capital improvements, especially in our properties in New York City. I've been because we wanted to also take advantage of the capital improvement tax benefits that were allowed through the 2018 tax new laws, mm-hmm. right? So because they give you accelerated depreciation on all these capital gains. So we've been putting in new sidewalks, new roofs, new front entrances to the properties, new intercom with systems with video accessibility, new surveillance systems. We've been renovating apartments that they've been coming up as they've been emptying out. Why? Because I have the time to do that now while I'm waiting to decide when I'm coming back into this market and and how strong am I going to come into it. So, and at the same time, I'm shoring up the monthly rental aspect of our business, because we essentially have 2 businesses, right? We have our fix and flips, and then we have our long-term hold with our rentals. And what I don't want to be bogged down with is the rental aspect of the business. We want to shore that up, get it 100% going where I don't have to worry about that, and I can concentrate on picking up all the, the foreclosures and short sales and the unfortunate catastrophe that I suspect we're going to be coming into financially probably right after the elections. I could be very much wrong, but I'm anticipating that and I'm prepared for it precisely because one of the videos I did 2 days ago was essentially we educate ourselves. My partner and I were constantly reading. We're constantly trying to gather as much information. One, to know where the market is going, how we're going to react to that market. Three, if we're going to play defense and how do we play defense, or we're going to play offense and how we're going to play that offense, and where are we going to jump back into the market with.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a time to be opportunistic because
Yes.
Right now there aren't many people who are able to, that have the cash to put to work. And then if someone's selling in this environment, they're probably a motivated seller, so you probably can get a good deal.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yep.
For me, it's absolutely necessary because I can't be fixing proper, I can't be taking calls during the day for stuff that's going on in Indiana. And to his point about profits, if you have a good profit margin on the house itself, typical property manager is going to charge you only from 8% to 10%. I honestly think it's an invaluable thing, like an invaluable service. And if you have a good property manager, you're more than happy to pay that much, honestly. That would be a problem if you're buying in areas with very thin margins. So it really depends on where you're buying and the properties you're buying.
Absolutely. So in my case, we don't have a property manager because this is all I do. I do this 24/7, 7 days a week. And Joseph will tell you, not only do I do this, I don't have to do this anymore. And I'm not trying to be boisterous, but the reality is I don't need to do this at the rate that I'm doing it. I do it because I love to do it. But we have a machine in place because we've been doing this for 31 years. So for instance, for my properties in Florida, we have 2 crews going on a constantly basis, renovating all our new properties or turning over rentals. So, if somebody calls me up because there's a leaky faucet, I call up one of my guys and I said, they're usually working in the same complex or the same community or the same area. It's only going to take them 5 minutes to go change a flap on a toilet. So if you do your renovations the right way, and if you buy the right appliances and you're on top of that water heater, making sure you're changing it out every 10 years and not waiting for it to bust, because those things always bust on the most unopportune times,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they create more damage than just the water heater. So, I know when that 10th year is coming up, I'm changing that on 9 years and 6 months, whether it's busted or not, because I don't need the headaches. So, again, this is all I do. Joseph does other stuff other than the real estate. So for him, yes. For me, no, I don't need that. So I'll tell you how I invest in vacant land, and I've been investing in vacant land since 2000. I actually put my first 2 daughters through college with land that I bought in Cape Coral, Florida for $3,000 and sold at $35,000. And I was upset with myself because it went up as high as $50,000, and it didn't make no sense to me. And I remember my accountant, Mr. Hyde, at the time saying, Danny, never be upset with such a great return in a short period of time. But what I look for when I'm buying vacant land, and again, let's go back to what I said earlier, I read a lot. So I want to know, one of the websites you could use is the State Department, DOT. It tells you where they're expanding their roads, if they're making any exits off of existing highways, if they're making like a highway from 1 lane in each direction to 2 lanes in each direction with shoulders. When they're doing this, it's because they're expecting population growth, or it could be an escape, like in Florida's case, they do that where they need more evacuation routes going north, getting away from the hurricanes. But all that brings commerce, all that brings more people, because roads create easy logistics, right? So that's one of the things I look for. I go to a lot of community board meetings. I sit down with councilmen. I actually call the councilman's office and ask them questions. I try to find out where the development's coming before people who actually even live there know when it's coming, because that's how I then go in and pick up property before the rest of the public actually knows. You could Google this. You could Google things like the best 10 areas to invest in. But then you have to decide, there's certain things when it comes to land. You got what they call infill lots. So you may have, like, for an area, and I'll just use this as an example. There's an area in Florida. It's called Point Siena, Florida, right? It's right outside Orlando. It's right outside Kissimmee. They share actually same zip code as part of Kissimmee. It's Polk County. So village like 2, 3, 4, 5 were already developed. There's 8 villages in that particular community. And you could pick up lots that are in between houses already. Those are called infill lots. Or you could go then further out into Point Siena and where there's land in an abundance where there are no houses built. You could go 6, 7 blocks and maybe have one house built in each per block. But eventually it's getting there, right? So I started buying there 7 years ago at a much lower price than what it is today, and I actually just sold all my lots that were there to a developer in the past 6 months. Why? Because I found out through going through the Department of Transportation that they were bringing another highway to the back end of Point Siena, which was going to open up the back end, making it easier for people to get to work into Orlando or other areas of that particular Central Florida. So these are the things that we do to determine where we're going to buy and how we're going to buy. All right, guys. So this was really fun. This was my first live interview.
Yeah.
I hope you guys got a lot of information out of it, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed doing this together.
Definitely.
And again, my nephew Joseph, 32 years old. How many doors? 36?
36 right now.
36 doors, and he did that within 2 years from the time he purchased his first property. But what I have to emphasize, it just wasn't 2 years of him doing this. It was as a result of him learning how to save from a young age, 30%, right? Mm-hmm. And learning how to educate himself. But in Joseph's defense as well, since I've known this kid, he's been making money. He's an entrepreneur at heart. Why don't you tell him just before we leave a couple of things he used to do as a kid?
Yeah, I mean, when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, I invested in baseball cards. I used to drag my mom to the malls and to the VFW halls to go to baseball card shows. And like the best day of the month for me was getting the Beckett books that had all the prices in them. And then one day my dad said, you can do that every day with the newspaper if you invest in stocks. So I had a personal trading account when I was in like 8th grade.
There you go.
Yeah, so it's been I've been doing this for a long time, and it's just something that you have to like doing it. If you're going to get into this, you got to like doing it, and it's really important to have a why. You want to have like a very strong why.
That's so important. Yeah, and I guess that should be my question to you guys. Before you decide to invest in real estate, what is your why? What's your why? And then are you willing to sacrifice for whatever your why is? Because this is not a business for the lazy person or the person who's going to make excuses. Because money doesn't understand laziness. Money understands hustle. That's all that money understands. Money doesn't know what color skin you are, what your religion is, whether you're a criminal or ex-criminal, whether whether you have a college degree or don't have a college degree. Money only goes to those that are willing to work the hardest, work the smartest, and think outside the box. Would you say that, Joseph?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you really just, we're talking about stuff that I used to do when I was 8, but it really doesn't take that much time on a day-to-day basis. If you get the books and you read for an hour a day, if you read it for an hour a day for a year, you're going to know more than 95% of people in the country about real estate. So don't think it's some insurmountable mountain. It's one step at a time, one day at a time. Just start to educate yourself, and you'll be ahead of the game. I just want to plug my Instagram.
Oh
page.
yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
I'm sorry.
No, we just launched it today. It's called KJ Consulting. It's KAYJAY Consulting on Instagram. We just launched it today, so
why don't you give them your email address as well?
Yeah, if you want to ask me a question, you can send a DM to the Instagram, or you can email me at MEARES, M as in Mary, EARES .JOE@gmail.com. Thank you so much, guys. It was fun talking to you.
Again, great person to get advice from. He's very generous with his time. And again, if you guys have any questions about investing in real estate, feel free to reach out to Dan Borrero, USA Land Ventures. Have a great time.
Great night, guys.